guys, it's Dave here. Thanks for watching as always. Today I wanted to take a look at Virgin Orbit in light of the recent news that their funding deal collapsed, their emergency funding deal to continue operations for the company. They were speaking to one main investor who was talking about putting $200 million into the company, and unfortunately that deal fell apart. So Virgin Orbit is now having to lay off almost 90% of all their employees. It's really a horrible story for anyone working at the company or involved with the company in any way, that's for sure. So if you're an investor in Virgin Orbit out there, you definitely have my sympathy as well. But I thought today it would be interesting to just take a look at like what happened, how did we get to this point, how will this affect the industry, is there any chance of this sort of thing happening to any other companies, and some other thoughts around this massive turn of events, because not too long ago, Virgin Orbit was looking like it was going to be one of the main players in the small satellite launcher business. Rocket Lab, maybe one or two others, they were really shaping up to be a big name in the industry, and now they're pretty much gone. Before we get into all that though, if you're new here and you enjoy space investing and investing in general, definitely invite you to hit that subscribe button. I'll come back with videos very regularly on investing. And if you're not new here, every like does help out with the algorithm. Always appreciate that. By the way, we also do have a Discord link down in the description below. We're running a investing competition. It's going to start up very soon for Q1 of 2023, where we all calculate our return for the quarter, see who did the best, just for fun, maybe generate discussion about like how people did the best and stuff like that. That out of the way, let's dive into what has gone wrong with Virgin Orbit. So, as I said, Virgin Orbit was in talks with investor Matthew Brown to raise $200 million for the company, and the emergency funding failed after the deal fell through at the last minute. So the company said they have no choice but to lay off about 85% of their staff, most of which had already been furloughed and were off work without pay at this point, keeping only 100 employees, at least for now. Sounds like they may still attempt to launch one last rocket if they can to prove out their capabilities. Or some of those employees may just be on to help unwind the company and, ensure distributions of assets and all that sort of thing. So all this is following a big high-profile failure of a recent launch. This was the first ever launch of a rocket from the United Kingdom, from their spaceport Cornwall, and it was looking like it was going to be a really big deal. There's never been a space launch from the United Kingdom. It's a very large country, kind of odd that don't really have that. So it was very exciting for them to get this for their space program, their space capability. A lot of people thought it was long overdue. Unfortunately, the rocket failed, came back to Earth. The satellites did not deploy successfully, and that was really a massive blow for the company. Back in the day when the company did first go public, they were valued at $3.7 billion or so. Now they're down to just $67 million. So if you bought since the beginning, you're obviously extremely unhappy. And again, I hope all you guys watching out there, if you did invest in it, you got out well before this. But definitely a rough situation for all the investors involved in the company, that's for sure. Now, in terms of the employees and severance, their CEO, Dan Hart, did say on an all-hands call recently that, first of all, he said this is probably going to be the hardest all-hands that we've ever done in my life. I should hope so. And he said, this company, this team, all of you, means a hell of a lot to me, and I will not stop supporting you, whether you're here on the journey or if you're going elsewhere. Now, Virgin Orbit will provide a severance package for every departing employee, Hart said, with a cash payment, extension of benefits, and support in finding a new position with a direct pipeline at their sister company, Virgin Galactic. So it does seem like they're treating the departing employees pretty well, at least as well as they can for the most part. So they do have my respect for that, at least. If you're wondering how they're paying for this, Richard Branson's Virgin Group actually recently injected another $10 million or so into the company, which some people saw and they thought, wait, maybe there'll be a last-minute lifeline to get to another launch and continue the company. But no, we're hearing that this is for the express purpose of winding things down, paying out severance for employees and stuff like that. So no lifeline really on that one. The company plans to spend $8.5 million on severance packages and another $6.5 million on outplacement services to help employees transition to new jobs. A lot of things, people at other companies that have gone out of business certainly haven't always had. In addition to this, I have also heard that some employees from Virgin Orbit have already been applying to Rocket Lab, who have an office nearby, as well as other companies. And aerospace engineers do tend to get paid pretty well, and they're in very high demand right now. So hopefully those engineers will be fine. I'd be more concerned with some of the other staff who aren't, engineers, but hopefully everyone will be able to come out of this okay and find new positions in terms of employees. However, now 11 days before they laid off these 675 employees, the board of directors of Virgin Orbit decided to revamp its executive remuneration policy, and under these new terms, CEO Dan Hart could receive compensation of $1.5 million or more should the company be taken over or go bust. And this I am not a fan of. I think it's kind of horrible to be giving your CEO, who has led your company to failure, $1.5 million when you're having to lay off all these people that rely on their salaries. I just don't like that at all, to be honest. I feel like if I was CEO of a failing company and I had kind of, mismanaged things, I should be giving up my salary to go to employees, not the other way around, getting a big chunk. But this is what's happening, and I've seen it a lot with other companies. Always distasteful, but for whatever the reason, it seems to be the case. Apparently, the remaining 100 employees will still attempt to launch again, at least according to the company. So we'll see if that does happen. Whether it does, that money they receive from the launch would not be enough to run the company in any sort of an ongoing basis. They must be hoping that a successful launch from the UK will entice some investor to give them a more significant payment than just the $12 million or whatever they would get from the launch. They'll definitely need a lot more than that in order to continue operations for the company. One of the question marks we really have around this whole story is what is going on with Richard Branson right now. He's been strangely quiet lately. The 72-year-old has not said anything publicly since the crisis began. He's kind of left the CEO, Dan Hart, to fend for himself throughout this whole process, which is kind of weird because his Virgin Group has put $1 billion into this company. He's kind of been the face of the company from the beginning. You've seen him at launches. You've seen him doing press videos and interviews and stuff like that. So where the heck is he? What's going on right now? This is a very strange turn of events, considering all the time and money this billionaire has put into this company to just disappear like this. Instead, he seems to have been kind of hedging against his position in Virgin Orbit, giving them small amounts of money on the condition that he gets kind of first dibs on some of their assets should something happen with the company. Perhaps the only explanation is he decided the company's not savable, not worth continuing to invest in, and trying to, wind things down as best he can while still recovering enough money for himself. Yeah, very odd situation for Richard Branson. Even more odd than that though, is before the crisis went mainstream and everyone kind of knew about it, people like me who watched the financials could see what way the company was going, but a lot of regular people or news people weren't really aware of it. They were getting ready to launch their first ever rocket from the United Kingdom. Now, Richard Branson is from the United Kingdom. He's always had a passion for space. Why would he not be at the first ever space launch from the United Kingdom, his home country, from the company that he started, put $1 billion into, and a lot of time and effort into it? Why wouldn't he be there supporting them? He's been to other launches. It was really strange that he did not really appear in person, talk to anyone live. I think there may have been a recorded video or something, but what's going on with him? He's very quiet of late. I mean, after all, 2 years ago, he actually participated in the first passenger flight from Virgin Galactic, which was his other space company. He was actually, one of the passengers on board, literally probably risking his life, knowing the history of this vehicle that has had a fatality before, really supporting the company and being there for them. And he's just kind of disappeared lately. Even on the Virgin Galactic side, I haven't really seen much of him. Odd situation. Maybe he's just kind of distancing himself from his space investments, seeing as how they're not going too great lately. Perhaps he's just decided to focus on spending more time with his family, stuff like that. I'm not too sure. It's very odd to me that this has happened and he's been nowhere to be found. And from the perspective of a space investor, seeing what can we learn, what can we look for in other companies that could face a similar fate, or can we make sure that the companies we're investing in are not on a similar path? So the number one big problem that started this whole thing was that the business was underfunded from the get-go. So it went through a SPAC process like a lot of these new space companies do. And if you're familiar with that at all, the shareholders going into the SPAC are basically allowed to redeem their shares for $10 instead of taking shares in the new company as that acquisition company acquires the private company coming public. So that's why SPACs always start off at $10 per share. You'll see it might seem odd to you otherwise, but literally like every SPAC will start trading around $10 per share. Now, a lot of people seem to decide to take their money at $10 per share instead of take possession of those shares and become shareholders in the new company going forward. So that was really a big blow to Virgin's financing. This was back in August of 2021. Virgin Orbit estimated that it needed around $420 million in cash. In December of 2021, after completing its SPAC merger, the company raised only $228 million, less than half the $483 that it expected to raise, again, because a lot of those warrant redemptions and things of that nature. So from the get-go, they didn't have as much money as they planned, not nearly. And Rocket Lab luckily did. It raised well over $500 million. They had something more like $700 million to get going with. So that's one worry you don't have to worry about with Rocket Lab, is that the seeds of their failure were not sown during the SPAC process, at least for Rocket Lab. Now, given this lack of capital, to me at least, it seems like they should have really radically changed their plans. They didn't really do that, though, for some strange reason. One way I like to think of cash burn is that for these growing companies that are not yet profitable, you're basically paying money today for what will become, hopefully, regular future cash flows. So the more you invest today, the larger potentially those future cash flows could be. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than this, and you can get different returns on your investments. But I made a couple little charts here just to show. This first one here, we can see that the chart goes well negative, so they're spending a ton of money, and then that resulting when you manage to go positive, if you do, it correspondingly, the cash flow shoots up because you've made those heavy investments. Now, obviously, this can be scary when you're in the cash burn phase and you don't know if you're going to get there, and you're really in this kind of scenario trying to hit the home run, trying to make your future company as big and profitable as possible and get like massive amounts of revenue. But you don't have to do this. So this second chart here, what we're seeing is much more modest spending and investing for the future. You're still spending, you're still negative for a while before you go positive, and then when you do go positive, you're not making as much money as you would have if you had made those heavy investments, but at least you're more safe and you're not going to go out of business, even if in the future, you're just a smaller company than you would have been if you were able to make those larger investments. It's definitely a trade-off. It's one, it seems clear that Virgin probably should have made, spend less for the future, settle for being, a smaller company that can get by on fewer launches instead of really just trying to build out this massive infrastructure for the future. And obviously, this is something we have to take into account when we're looking at other space companies and looking at their cash flows. I would say Rocket Lab does fall under more of the first chart where we're really spending aggressively on Neutron, but hopefully because we did raise more like $700 million, they will be able to get through to the cash flow positive and realize the resulting higher revenues that go with those higher investments. Back to Virgin Orbit, though, just to some examples of kind of the scale of what they were planning for and building and spending. We can see they're really building out infrastructure like across the world here. They have their headquarters, obviously. Then they're looking into launch out of Brazil, obviously Spaceport Cornwall for launch. They're looking at Poland for sovereign launch capabilities there. They had a deal with Luxembourg for Europe launch. They're talking about launch from South Korea. They had a memorandum of understanding with a corporation in Australia for looking into launch there. Like all over the place. Now, if you know ahead of time, you've raised half the money you were originally planning on raising, maybe just stick to one location, get launching from there off of like one spacecraft, get things going, because you don't want to try to do all this, spend all this money on various capabilities, because you're going to run out of money sooner than you realized. Looking at this is another slide from one of their earnings calls. We can see that they purchased 2 additional Boeing 747 aircraft to modify, and they would be paying a third-party company to modify those and carry their rockets. First aircraft were expected to be delivered in 2023. Maybe if you see this on the horizon and you know you have less money than you planned, just stick with one aircraft. Why are you buying 2 more here? Seems a little odd to me. I don't think that would have been my move, knowing the cash balance situation. Again, I'm sure I wouldn't be as good a CEO as one of these guys. There's probably more factors going into it, but to my mind, stick with one plane, one spaceport until you can get going when you see that cash balance dropping. Definitely something to keep in mind for these other companies that we look into in the space industry, which are trying to expand extremely rapidly, and most of them are not in a cash flow positive situation, just like Virgin Orbit. Now, some other thoughts I've come across on why they may have failed is some insiders have kind of said that there's a lot of old school mentality going on with Virgin Orbit. So CEO Dan Hart actually came from the Boeing company, where he had various leadership roles. I think we all know they're not known for being the most efficient company in the world. We've seen massive overruns and delays on Starliner, the SLS, all these other things. And you really need to have a different perspective when you're working on a space startup, I think, than one of these old school, massive behemoth space companies that seem to be able to just get the government to pay them whatever they need and delay however many times they want. Definitely not the case with some of these new small private companies. Need to be more agile and more lean than a Boeing for sure. I did see an interesting article here from CNBC where they spoke to some insiders with the company. Obviously, they talk about CEO Dan Hart being at Boeing. Also, COO Tony Gingiss spent time in Boeing's satellite division, and Chief Strategy Officer Jim Simpson also spent more than 8 years in Boeing's satellite division. So a lot of people coming from Boeing into this company. And now, I'm not trying to hate on Boeing completely, because you do have to hire people from somewhere, and there's not that many companies that give experience in the space industry, so that can be hard. But definitely a lot of the Boeing culture seemingly seeping in here. One person emphasized that the company launched the same amount of rockets in a year with a staff of 500 as it did with a workforce of over 750 people. So if you're launching with 500, then adding 750 people and you're launching the same number of rockets, why? What are those extra 250 people doing? There's been complaints of lack of cross-department coordination and silos between divisions. That's a very common complaint across organizations, though. 2 people also mentioned wastefulness in ordering materials. For example, the company would buy enough expensive items with limited shelf life to build a dozen or more rockets, then build only 2, meaning it would have to throw away millions of dollars of raw materials. That sounds kind of like a Boeing mentality, definitely pretty wasteful in a company that is really needing to conserve as much capital as possible. Seems like they just weren't doing it for some odd reason. It's almost like they were operating like they didn't know this was coming. But if you watch every quarterly earnings call, it's obvious what is happening to the cash balance. So I don't know how you can claim like, what a surprise, you know? Anyway. So in terms of Rocket Lab, this is something I've thought about as well. We've watched their cash reserves go from 700 million to around 480. Now, I still do believe that they have enough cash in order to reach profitability. Maybe when you're comparing the situation with what happened with Virgin Orbit, for Rocket Lab, the safer and less profitable future path would have been focus on getting your cadence on your Electron up, focus on getting reusability figured out and down cold, where you're reusing the rockets reliably. In order to get your Electron profitable, then you get your space systems profitable as well. Then you're running a profitable company, and from there you can look at investing in Neutron. Whereas they've kind of just been doing the all-at-once approach. So they've been working on Electron reusability, working on really building out their space systems business, and investing massive amounts of money in Neutron. So you go back to that chart from before, they're clearly spending a ton and dipping down. They're hoping to get the corresponding massive amounts of revenue in the future. So hopefully we hit a home run on this one. We all do as investors. Does look like they have enough cash to get this done, but the, I guess, less risky path to being profitable and a safer path perhaps could have been delaying Neutron, but I'm not advocating that. It's just, what the only other thing I could think of that could have been done. Downside to that path is obviously lower profits for the next several years. It would be more like trying to hit a single instead of a home run. And then we have to ask ourselves what the implications are for Virgin Galactic. It's still publicly traded. It's still in business. It was launched as well by Richard Branson. I think there's going to be a lot less confidence in Branson continuing to fund Virgin Galactic if needed going forward. Investors are probably going to be a lot more concerned, a lot more worried. They probably felt like with Virgin Orbit, they had a parachute that he would always just support them, and then it just disappeared. It'd be like skydiving and your parachute disappeared. So definitely now, at least Virgin Galactic shareholders maybe have that heads up that we don't have that safety net that we thought we did. Now, they are continuing to burn cash at a extremely impressive rate, really. I do wonder if they're falling into the same trap of spending too much and not being able to make it to profitability. I really do worry about Virgin Galactic and their future. Definitely not one I would be interested in investing in at this point. Ultimately, these are two different businesses. Remains to be seen how they execute. It's not a given just because Virgin Orbit failed that Virgin Galactic won't execute. But again, I would not invest in Virgin Galactic. And now there's probably a lot more question marks around this company as well. Could hit their share price in the short term. And I think it actually probably already has, as this news around Virgin Orbit has come out. Some interesting stuff in terms of the current backlog on Virgin Orbit. They have a 143 million binding backlog as of September 30th, 2022, as well as over $900 million in active proposals or memorandums of understanding or letters of intent. So not quite binding, but still looking like potentially they could get those deals. So it is a relatively significant backlog, really. Some of these launches may end up going to other players. It could be a Rocket Lab, could be a Terran 1 if they get that going properly, or one of these other competitors. Firefly, perhaps. We'll have to wait and see. But we can see there is a backlog here. Hopefully their backlog is a little bit more real than Astra's backlog was for their Rocket 3.0 system. We really only saw the Tropics from that, and I haven't seen a lot of other contracts from Astra go elsewhere. For example, we have one here where a Poland-based satellite manufacturer known as StatRev announced a launch services agreement for additional launches from Virgin Orbit for 2023 and beyond. 500 kilograms over multiple launches to a variety of different orbital planes. So since it's around 500 kilograms over multiple launches, you have to think the Electron could handle it. We have another one here. Spire Global had an agreement, a multi-launch agreement with Virgin Orbit to purchase multiple launches starting in 2023. So again, you have to think that this is a real contract, and as it does appear, if Virgin Orbit goes fully under, then this might be up for grabs from another provider. There's really only one reliable one currently on the market, but the Electron and the Launcher 1 are different rockets, that's for sure. So we can see Electron, they can do 300 kilograms to low Earth orbit, as well as 200 kilograms to sun synchronous orbit, whereas Launcher 1 from Virgin Orbit can do 500 kilograms to low Earth orbit and 300 to sun synchronous. So definitely a bit of a larger rocket, and they could take larger payloads. So if there are any payloads in this backlog that are above 300 kilograms to low Earth orbit, then unfortunately Electron probably wouldn't be able to handle it. However, it does seem like Electron could handle at least some of them. It would definitely be nice to see for us Rocket Lab investors that backlog growing again over the next few quarters. Now, the other thing to consider here is I think this really does go to show that the funding environment for the space industry and these cash-burning type of companies is really bad right now. If a company like Virgin Orbit can't secure funds out there on the open markets, you really don't want to be having to raise more money if you're an investor in a Rocket Lab or a Terran or ASTS or any of these other space SPAC companies or Redwire. Clearly the funding environment is very bad right now. We've all seen how hard the share prices have been hit. You don't want dilution at these levels, and also even if you need the funding, it just might not be there. So something to keep in mind if you're investing in a company, don't just assume that they're going to be able to raise more money pretty easily, because we're not in that kind of environment where the kind we were a couple years ago, where it just felt like money was falling from trees and anyone could raise $1 billion in cash. We're definitely not there anymore. So that's it for today. At the end of the day, I feel bad for the employees. Hopefully they can find new positions. I feel bad for the investors of the company. I don't feel too bad for CEO Dan Hart, who is apparently getting $1.5 million. And I don't feel too bad for Richard Branson either, who decided not to continue funding it, even though he's put in $1 billion or so up to this point. But yeah, definitely a rough situation, and it looks like hopefully there won't be too much of a ripple effect across investing in the space industry. We'll have to continue watching Virgin Galactic to see how they perform. There is a decent backlog there that maybe will get freed up. Maybe Rocket Lab can get a few more launches out of it. Perhaps one of these other providers, Relativity, Firefly, one of the others, could get some more launches as well. We'll have to wait and see on that one. And the industry continues. Launch will go on. So yeah, let me know down in the comments below. Were you ever a Virgin Orbit shareholder? When did you buy? When did you sell? Are you shocked at what has happened here? Did you think Richard Branson would continue funding the company basically forever? And what do you think the future holds for Launch? Definitely interested to continue the conversation below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you've had a great weekend, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.